Hello, and thank you for tuning in. I'm here with Barbara Strasser, Children's Rights Project Manager at the Global Campus of Human Rights. Barbara is a child protection specialist with over 14 years of on-the-ground experience working in complex emergencies and especially focusing on conflict-affected contexts. She has worked with the ICRC, the International Committee for the Red Cross, and various international NGOs. And she's here today to reflect with us about the protection of children's rights, and in particular, the protection of the right to education in armed conflict. So a warm welcome to you, Barbara. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you so much, Angela. It's a pleasure to be here with you.
Let's start with a general question, Barbara. Why don't you tell us a bit more about how the right to education is relevant to your work in child protection?
So one thing I've seen in the course of my work is that education itself is a key protective factor for children living through armed conflict. It's estimated that about 1 out of 5 children is either fleeing or living in a situation of conflict. And whether or not these children are having access to education has a huge impact on their safety, on their well-being, and on their future. We know that out-of-school children are much more exposed to different risks associated with violence, exploitation, abuse. And for example, one thing I've seen when working in northern Iraq was, for example, that girls that were out of school were disproportionately affected by issues like child marriage, early marriage. And many of the boys that we worked with were forced into situations of child labor, where they were working in very unsafe conditions, were very much at risk. One thing that's also important to keep in mind is schools ideally provide like a safe place for children to be and offer different services that can be in conflict situations much more difficult to access. For example, there could be access to healthcare, food, so school meals might be provided, and also for children that might already be experiencing violence, abuse, neglect, exploitation at home. If they're in school, these issues are more likely to be identified, and the child is more likely to receive support, some kind of assistance to get out of an abusive situation, than out-of-school children who do not have this additional protective layer that the schools would provide. Schools also, we know, like, especially in a conflict setting where everything is thrown, like all the normalcy goes out of the window, basically. So the routine, the stability of going to school, of meeting their peers, has a huge impact on children's mental health and well-being, and their ability to cope with the situation that they're living through.
Indeed, and that's really, the situation is what makes the difference. So how have you seen the right to education being affected in conflict situations?
So we know the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attacks is reporting that attacks on education are increasing overall. So this could be threats against or attacks on teachers, on school staff, on students. Like, for example, all of us, we heard about the abductions of girls from schools in northern Nigeria. What I've seen quite a lot of in my work is also the military use of schools. So this could be, as an example, an armed group or even the army camping in or around school grounds because there are the facilities, there's space, often there's the Wi-Fi signal at the school. So they would be staying for often quite long periods of time in and around schools, and by their presence putting students at risk. And this can be can cause or disrupts the education, the access to education for the children, sometimes even long after they've gone. For example, a village I was working in, our team was working in, there was an armed group that was camping in the school building of the village. and they were attacked by another group. They were in a dispute for the area. So there was a battle. In this battle, 2 people died. And even months and up to a year after this has happened, the children did not want to go back to the school. So they were scared. You could see everything was like the grass was growing. Nobody was going to this area because they were scared. They didn't want to go back there.
Well, that sounds to me like a very understandable reaction on the side of students or also teachers and other educators. So how would you address such a situation? In practice, what would you do?
Yeah. So different actors have different roles to support communities that live in such situations or situations where such things can happen. For the ICSC, for example, protection dialogue is at the core of its mandate, at the heart of its mandate. So what does this mean? So this means basically going out and talking to the weapons bearers, to the people that have the guns in the conflict, and reminding them of the importance of access to education for children, for adolescents, for the community, and trying to get them to avoid any actions that could put the access to education at risk. So what you're trying to do is to achieve that such situations occur in the first place. If it happens, you would still talk to them and follow up and highlight the impact that their actions have caused on civilian populations. And then, of course, depending on also the presence, the access of other actors, there could be things like risk awareness training. So there could be direct assistance, like the rehabilitation of a school, establishment of temporary learning spaces, or provision of school materials, some financial assistance so that students can continue going to school. Other actors might focus maybe more on like the psychosocial well-being of the students, of the teachers, the curricula, what can be done to help them cope as well.
Indeed, it's very significant what you say and the different options that are there, because sometimes we tend to forget that there are indeed options and it's not a hopeless situation. So I thank you very much for these examples, very concrete instances. Are there any other issues relating to the right to education in armed conflict that you would like to mention or highlight?
One thing that I would really like to zoom in and that struck me particularly is that education is also what children ask about over and over and over again. So it's a priority for children. And one instance where this really, it brought my own preconceived notions really to, it made it, it made me aware of it, was when I was working as a caseworker for unaccompanied and separated children in Cairo, Egypt. And I was about to meet a child for the first time, a child I knew that he was from Eritrea. Let's call him Tesfai. So Tesfai had fled from Eritrea. He had suffered very severe violence during his flight. He had survived, but now was in a situation where he didn't have a stable place to live. So he was staying a couple of nights at one friend's place and then at another place, but nothing stable. And he hadn't yet been able to register for financial assistance. So even money for the most basic things, even for food, he didn't have access to it yet. So of course, before meeting with him, I think, okay, so this child is going to ask me, so where can I get food? How can I register for financial assistance? How can I get some place to live at? And he surprised me. Like the first thing that he asked me, and what he came back to again and again and again through our conversation was, how can I go to school? When can I go back to school? When can I learn? And this is one example of like the many, many times that colleagues or myself have seen this from children, from families, that education is a priority for them. They want to learn, they want to build a future. And from children that I've worked with that were not able to access education, you could really see how strongly they were affected by it. They felt they were wasting time. They were in limbo and they could not do anything towards a better situation in the future. And I think what's important to mention as well is that adolescents are particularly affected by this because already there's quite little funding for education available in emergencies, in armed conflict. So the little funding there is usually is prioritizing primary education, so the younger children, For adolescents, there's very little available. And of course, they are at a very difficult age, and it leaves them, as I've mentioned at the very beginning, much more exposed to different forms of violence, abuse, exploitation. And we know that the longer children are out of school, the more difficult it is for them to return. So what is important is that we really education, that it's not an afterthought, that from the very onset of an emergency, from the very start of the conflict, we think about, okay, what can we do to protect children's access to education? So to limit any interruptions as much as possible.
And I particularly like this point that you make about thinking of education as a right at all levels, not only primary level, which is the focus very often. So thank you for highlighting that aspect as well. And I think that your examples really show how important it is to consider the right to education as an important part of the whole set of children's rights. And if we don't do that, we run the risk of leaving it as it is an important but often empty promise. Instead, if we call it right, it really makes a difference. So what would be your final message to your audience in this sense?
So there's a lot of interesting work that's being done around protecting education from attacks, protecting the access to education in armed conflict. One example would be, for example, the work that is being done around the Safe Schools Declaration that was launched in 2015. And I'm sure you're going to hear a lot about this in other parts of the MOOC. But for me, like from this brief meeting, what I would like to have as a takeaway for you is that education, it's not a nice to have that can be put on hold and then resumed without problems once everything is well again. Education really is a human right, and as such, it has a strong impact on the safety, on the well-being of children, and it can be life-saving for children living through armed conflict.
Thank you, Barbara. That's a very inspiring thought. And with this, I would really like to thank you for your time, for your insights, and wish you all the best for your work. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much. It was a pleasure.